So another campaign promise that Trump has, where he's completely betrayed his base and where they feel like they were bamboozled, is on Ukraine. Trump came in declaring that he would be able to end this war, this proxy war, in 24 hours. And he made everyone think, including me, that maybe there was some progress there when he delivered Zelensky the humiliating lecture he deserved for his entitled behavior in the Oval Office, insulting entitled behavior, something that Netanyahu richly deserves. And now Trump is promising more weapons to Ukraine. He's going along. He seems to be supporting Lindsey Graham's pledge for 500% sanctions on Russian exports, just an escalation of economic warfare on the most sanctioned country on the planet. And there are reports we'll discuss that Trump was asking Zelensky if he could hit Moscow and St. Petersburg to improve Donald Trump's hand at the negotiating table. Aaron, what's going on here?
Well, I think there's two main things going on. One, I think, Trump doesn't have any coherent political principles, and he goes whichever way the wind blows. So after a little bit of a backlash from people like Lindsey Graham over his administration pausing some weapons to Ukraine, which they did recently, Trump caved and now wants to look tough against Russia and is announcing this new weapon shipment to appease them. I do think, though, at the same time, that proxy warriors like Lindsey Graham and others are hyping what Trump is actually committed to. He's going to sell weapons to NATO under the supposed new scheme, but I don't see really what is new there, except that this has Trump's imprint on it. Can NATO afford to pay for all these new weapons? Already, France and Italy are dropping out of this supposed scheme. So I don't know where the money exactly is going to come from to pay for these new weapons. And these reports that were in the Financial Times and the Washington Post about Trump encouraging Zelensky to strike Moscow, I think that those came from Ukrainian sources who took something Trump said and spun that their own way. So the Financial Times reported that Trump encouraged Zelensky to hit Moscow. But the problem is Zelensky can't. He doesn't have the weapons to do that. The longest range missiles he has are ATACMS, and those can't hit Moscow, and he doesn't have that many of them. He could with Tomahawks, but the Trump administration is refusing that so far, just as Biden did. And Trump was asked after that report came out, should Zelensky hit Moscow? And he said no. So I think that story that was not only in the Financial Times, but also in the Washington Post with David Ignatius, I think that reflected some spin from people who want to encourage Trump to go farther than he already has. But what he's done so far, and then you have the sanctions threat. So now he's given Russia 50 days, okay, 50 days to get serious about peace or else, right? So first of all, 50 days is a long time. So who knows how much more territory Russia can swallow up between now and then, especially given that they're in the midst of a summer offensive. And second of all, after 50 days, with him already having backed down previously on his tariffs against China, they were going to be like 145%. And after China, stood up to it, he backed down. Is he really now going to start another front in his trade war with China and with India? These are major trading partners with the U.S. Is he really going to do that over Ukraine? I find that really hard to believe. I think a lot of this is just tough talk to please people like Lindsey Graham. And not that it's not significant, because look, as you said, he promised to end the war, and he's done nothing really substantive to achieve that. He basically, the way to win the war, if he was serious about it, would be to sit down with Putin and address what Putin calls the root causes of the war. And that is two things, basically. It's NATO encroachment and the NATO military infrastructure surrounding Russia, all the missiles aimed at Russia, and things like Trump tearing up the INF treaty, which opened up the U.S. to place previously banned offensive missiles aimed at Russia. Like, it would be to address things like that. And also the status of, territory in eastern Ukraine, which Trump is, I think, to his credit, been more willing to do. Although that's not just up to Trump. Ukraine also has to be compelled to finally agree to respecting the rights of ethnic Russians in Ukraine as well, which has so far refused to do. So that's what he could do. So in the absence of doing that, he's caught between talking about making peace, but not doing anything for it. And also, meanwhile, wanting to curry favor with, wanting to be on the good side of Lindsey Graham and other war hawks. So he ends up now just coming out with this gesture. I think, to me, It's just his effort to look tough without really doing anything substantive. But here's his answer when he was asked about basically the reports in the Washington Post and Financial Times about encouraging Zelensky to hit Moscow. And this is what he said.
Russia 50 days. What happens now? Do you talk to Vladimir Putin? Well, at the end of 50 days, if we don't have a deal, it's going to be too bad. But what happens? Should Zelensky get more aggressive? Yeah, the tariffs are going to go on and the sanctions go on. Should Zelensky target Moscow? Should Zelensky target Moscow, sir? Should Zelensky target Moscow or deeper into Russia? No, he shouldn't target Moscow.
So there he is shooting that down. And what I suspect is, I'm sure he asked Zelensky, can you currently hit Moscow? But whether he encouraged him, personally, I strongly doubt it, especially given he's not giving Zelensky the weapons that would enable him to do that.
Zelensky wants tomahawks.
Yeah, he wants exactly.
The Pentagon has opposed that in the past. I mean, that's a 1,600 kilometer range.
And this speaks to, by the way, how cynical Biden is, because before Russia invaded, Russia wanted guarantees that the U.S. wouldn't put tomahawks in Ukraine. And Biden initially indicated that he would. Ray McGovern has highlighted this. Biden, in a phone call with Putin at the end of 2021, maybe early 2022, indicated he wouldn't do that. But then Antony Blinken, talking to Lavrov, walked that back and said, we're not going to rule out any missiles in Ukraine, but we will be willing to talk about caps on missiles, which for Russia was a non-starter. And then Russia invades. Zelensky asked for the tomahawks, and Biden says no, which just speaks to, it's yet another illustration of how Biden used the prospect of threatening Russia to basically bait it into invading alongside, along the, which is in conformity with the guidelines of that RAND paper you mentioned earlier. You basically extending Russia by getting it to invade Ukraine.
So isn't the problem here that Russia is basically winning too rapidly now? Ukraine's lines are collapsing. Russia's hitting recruitment centers with drone attacks in Ukrainian cities. There have been some video of Ukrainian men cheering because they don't want to go to the front. The Ukrainian public is increasingly in support of some negotiated settlement. But Zelensky wants the West to keep coming in and supporting him until he can get a stalemate and force some Russian backpedaling. But Russia just keeps winning on the battlefield. So the Kremlin has no real reason to negotiate on U.S. terms and agree to the Kellogg formula for some 60-day pause, which would allow Zelensky to remobilize and get more weapons shipments. Why should they do it? So Trump is just desperately trying to find some formula of his own using gunboat diplomacy, threats, bluster like he did with Iran, but against a much stronger country to intimidate it. And it's not working. And Russia's just not going to play that game. I think that's really what this comes down to.
I totally agree. And Trump seems to know all this. Like, this was in Politico the other day from a senior White House official. The president's view is Russia is going to win. It's a matter of how long it takes. Russia has the bigger economy, has the bigger military, has more than enough bodies to throw into the meat grinder, and just doesn't care. And although they're making slow progress, they're still making progress. The president just wants to stop the killing. So yeah, I think that's right. Everyone and the Biden people knew this too. Everyone knew that Russia was going to win. They just saw in the U.S. and other NATO states an opportunity to use Ukraine to bleed Russia and kill as many Russian soldiers as they could in the process. And that's basically still the prevailing policy. Trump is not ideologically committed to it, but he hasn't found the political fortitude to actually try to practice what he preaches and sit down with Putin and reach a peace deal. So in the absence of that, this war will go on until Russia achieves the final victory that everybody knows is inevitable.
And Trump will extend the war and betray his base and betray all the promises he made because the preponderance of power of the military industrial complex, which is just getting all these gifts from the big, beautiful bill, the military leadership, and NATO and the Europeans are a factor here too, aren't they, Aaron? They're obsessed with continuing this war. This war would be, if there were to be a negotiated solution in which Ukraine ceded the Donbass. They're about to be dealt a punishing blow around Pokrovsk, which is a major transportation hub. It's basically been destroyed, and Russia's advancing past it now. If they cede that and Crimea, NATO would treat that as like a defeat unlike any other that they've suffered, a major setback.
Yeah, because it would also expose the lie that's been their whole policy for more than a decade, which is to use the Minsk peace process as a smokescreen to integrate Ukraine militarily into NATO and use it to bleed Russia, which they're just obsessed with doing. But the problem now is, like, where's the money going to come from? NATO states don't have the money to pour in to this war at the level that the U.S. does. And the question for Trump is Trump going to go before Congress like Biden did and ask for $60+ billion again? I mean, if he did that, he'd get the money because Democrats are on board and so are enough Republicans. That's the question. Call me if he does do that. Make all the fun of me in the world because I would, I'd be so naive. But I just don't see him doing that. That's just one campaign promise. I just can't imagine him betraying. And this is everyone I've talked to in the White House, around the White House, says the same thing. But again, with him, you never know. He is that brittle. So you always have to leave open the possibility.
Well, yeah, they definitely want him to. And he's getting a lot of praise from transatlantic media outlets like The Economist. Trump's U-turn on Russia is utterly cynical and welcome. His pivot on flying arms could help Ukraine defend itself. So he's getting praised by The Economist. He's getting praised by CNN. It's like every time Trump does something militaristic, the mainstream corporate media and Democrats praise him and the beauty of our weapons, in the words of Brian Williams. It really shows the Democrats are not a true opposition party and that this was their war that Trump is continuing. Trump, he has a little locket of Hunter Biden around his neck, and he looks at it and says, this is why we're fighting for Ukraine, and I'm going to keep doing this. I mean, if someone would just bring it back to the laptop, maybe Trump would stop. Like he has to, because he'll only stop for cynical reasons.
That's the thing. Ukraine's been used in multiple elections now, in multiple stages of his political career to undermine him. In 2016, John Brennan got Ukrainian intelligence services to help him frame Russia as hacking the DNC. This recently came out in the New York Times. It was admitted to basically, I don't know, so 8 years later, that Ukrainian intelligence was used by John Brennan to make the case that Russia hacked the DNC. Okay. And then also during that same election, Ukrainian officials interfered in the U.S. election by colluding with the DNC and by leaking claims about Paul Manafort that were at minimum overblown and in some cases false. Not that he wasn't corrupt in Ukraine, but the thing about the ledger that appears to have been fabricated by Ukraine. And then you had Trump's first impeachment where he gets targeted and impeached because he froze some weapons to Ukraine. And then you have also, 2020, the laptop, that being blamed on Russia, him being accused of being soft. So he's been given so many reasons just politically to take revenge on his enemies by making peace with Russia and saying, like, you tried to undermine me by using Ukraine against me and by trying to blame Russia for my political success. But he still won't do it. Because the forces of war mongering in Washington, including in his own party, are just too strong. It just shows how bipartisan this whole thing is.
Yeah.
Like Lindsey Graham, back when Russia was accused of hacking the DNC, Lindsey Graham and John McCain during their trips to Ukraine, when they went to the front lines to encourage Ukrainian forces to keep shelling the people of the Donbass, both John McCain and Lindsey Graham talked about the DNC hacking by Russia as an assault on our democracy, and we're going to fight back. So even Trump's own allies, people like Lindsey Graham, have used all the attacks on him for their own agenda of warmongering, and Trump still caters to it even today.
Well, Donald Trump, while he promised sort of an end to this and had a chip on his shoulder because of all of the pseudo scandals that had been directed against him, manufactured against him with Ukraine as the backdrop, he also commands the George W. Bush coalition, which will support war if their leader tells them to, and are reflexively neocon. As we've been explaining throughout this whole stream, Donald Trump's base is not strictly Buchananite, skeptical of the war state, libertarian, or isolationist. And there's a new poll which shows that Donald Trump voters change their tune on arming Ukraine if they hear Donald Trump simply tell them to change their tune. It's an echelon poll found a rise in the proportion of Trump supporters backing U.S. aid to Ukraine compared with when the president returned to the White House in January. When respondents were told that it was Trump's decision, their support rose even further. So, I mean, this has been consistent on every poll. There's just basically a bunch of cultists. They don't have any principle other than Trump, and they're happy to see their tax money disappear into offshore accounts via the pockets of Ukrainian oligarchs and various weird Ukrainian ministries, like the Ministry of Digital Transformation, which will like take $100 million and spend it on 3 reports attacking Aaron Mate. Like, total waste of money. So what the poll signals is, yes, this war can continue through the entire Trump administration as long as there are Ukrainian bodies.
And that's what it comes down to. And to secure the Ukrainian bodies, what is happening? You see every day, if you want to, on social media, footage of Ukrainians being snatched off the street. Latest I saw was some guy was walking his dog, and like he gets nabbed by Ukrainian officers and pulled into a van, and the dog is like trying to like grab onto him to save him. It's just so sad. While meanwhile, the offspring of Ukrainian elites are generally exempt, and they're living comfortable lives either in Kyiv or abroad. And there was a recent headline in a Ukrainian outlet that said that Ukraine has lost 40% of its working age population. 40%, which is just, it's impossible to fathom. And that's the reality of the war that, people in the global north have been deprived of, because it undermines the narrative that needs to sustain the war. But it's a nightmare. It's a total nightmare. And unfortunately, because the Holocaust in Gaza is, a far worse crime, there just hasn't been, and because the war just keeps dragging on without an end, it just doesn't get the attention that it used to. But it's awful. And I agree with you. I basically, we're in this until Ukraine runs out of bodies to sacrifice on behalf of people elsewhere.
And my final point on this before we move on is, it's not just about Ukrainian bodies. What the Ukrainian military and SBU have always been able to do is they come up with some tactically brilliant operation or some major terror attack that convinces its Western donors through the media that they can keep giving them more funding and more weapons, and that it will still exact some price on Russia, because all they want to see is Russia suffer in some way, even if Ukraine continues to lose. And that's what Operation Spider's Web was all about for Zelensky. It had been planned for months and months, using commercially available converted drones that can drop munitions. The Ukrainian military managed to attack a hangar filled with strategic bombers, Russian strategic bombers, destroying many of them. They attacked Russian train lines. I was actually talking to a Russian friend who has no connection to government or anything, who lives in the US, who said that she would always take the train through Bryansk that was bombed by these Ukrainian drones. Many passengers had to be medevaced. And then when she goes back, she's just going to be driving. Everyone's driving now because they're afraid of the train lines, and, by design. But this was celebrated in Western media as this great operation that had changed the tide of battle. Well, it's not changing the tide of battle, because Russia continues to advance. It's just the kind of thing Zelensky does in order to keep, the PR machine cranking so he can get more funding. And I would expect more, and especially when he's gifted Taurus missiles and, long range offensive weapons. That's what the West wants to see. Now you go ahead.
Well, let me just just to highlight how dangerous this is and how the U.S. plays a key role. This is how the New York Times described that attack you just detailed, the attack on Russian nuclear assets by Ukraine. This is how the New York Times described it at the time. Some officials said Ukraine's drone attacks could be viewed as a gift to the United States. I mean, the insanity of this. Like, imagine Mexico or Canada
Lindsey Graham
attacking.
said that.
Yeah, well, like, imagine that, Canada or Mexico or some elements there attacking the nuclear triad of the U.S. and someone saying this is a gift to Russia. I mean, we would bomb Russia over that, or certainly we would threaten it. But this becomes so normalized now that we can just like wage a proxy war that includes going after nuclear infrastructure that this can pass without comment. And by the way, Lindsey Graham also feels entitled to say stuff like this. I don't know if you saw what he said the other day about Trump and Trump's recent threats of sanctions on Russia after 50 days and also sending weapons to Ukraine. Lindsey Graham said this. He says, if Putin and others are wondering what happens on day 51 after Trump's 50-day deadline expires, I would suggest they call the Ayatollah. So what he's saying is, after day 51, or on day 51, Trump could bomb Russia, just as he did Iran recently on Israel's behalf.
He's calling for Putin's assassination for the second time, I believe. And, this is a guy who's called to nuke Gaza. I don't think I've ever featured an Alex Jones tweet, but this is a great one. I believe Lindsey Graham may be leading a double life as Netanyahu's wife. Now it all makes sense. I mean, they do look kind of similar, like uncanny. But spiritually, Lindsey Graham is in that realm.
100%. Absolutely.
And he's a major influence on Trump. He's played, and as insane as his rhetoric seems, he's been kind of a savvy operator in trying to reposition America first as a sort of project for a new American century. And he's winning.
He is, and this is a guy who once, viciously attacked Trump when they ran against each other in the Republican presidential primary in 2016. They were bitter enemies, but he just sucks up to him, and now they're on, each other's good side. And as you and Anya talked about earlier, Trump, meanwhile, is going after someone like Thomas Massie, who's always been, nice to Trump, and he's supported aspects of his agenda. He's just been independent, especially on issues of war, and especially on issues pertaining to Israel, standing up to Trump's deference to Israel. And now Trump is trying to get him primaried. So it just shows how, it's not with Trump, it's not just a matter of him being thin-skinned. There are some ideologies that are guiding him. And one of them is just basically being totally on board with the war agenda.